Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from. I'd like to welcome you to today's AfricaLix webinar. It is the second webinar of 2023. Like the first webinar, it is going to showcase the work of a thematic research group that we're trying to promote within the AfricaLix network. We're trying to develop these thematic research groups in areas where there is a paucity or a very little research, or a need for more critical review of research that is ongoing in the African continent, and specifically with respect to the context of the African continent and individual African countries. So the first webinar that we held was last month, and looked at the theoretical intersection between global value chains and innovation systems thinking. And today's webinar is focused on science, technology, and innovation indicators and the measurement of science, technology, and innovation. My name is Rebecca Hanlon. I am a member of the AfricaLix Secretariat, a visiting researcher at the African Center for Technology Studies, which hosts the AfricaLix Secretariat, and also a professor at the University of Johannesburg, a trilateral research chair in transformative innovation. And today I'm very lucky to be able to introduce today's speakers. We have a nice lineup for you. Today, the session is going to be chaired by Lokove Seke from AUDA NEPAD. Lokove is a quantitative economist and an R&D innovation indicators specialist. We will also hear from Professor Glenda Cruz and colleagues. Glenda is the research lead for the thematic research group in STI indicators within the AfricaLix network. And we will then have a critical response from Annalyn Morgan, who is a senior program officer in SADC, with a focus on science, technology, and innovation. So without further ado, I will hand over to Seke. Welcome, Seke.
Thank you very much, Prof. Rebecca. I don't know if you can hear me and the audience can hear me properly.
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. So greeting to our distinguished participant. We are coming as the African Union because we believe all member countries on the continent are part of the African Union. And being part of the AfricaLix, I believe we are taking the agenda of measuring science, technology, and innovation beyond the government sector. As far as the government sector is concerned, we are implementing what is well known as the African Union flagship program on science, technology, and innovation measurement, known as the African Science, Technology, and Innovation Indicators Program. And as you know, AfricaLix is a very powerful stakeholder. And we also recognize the merit of South Africa being very mature in the way of measuring data. And beside that, we also see Nigeria also coming very strong because we have been involved in the process of data collection, supporting NACETEM. So today we need to give an opportunity to the two institutions really to take us through this process, because we had the first webinar in Cameroon. I know it was physical during the AfricaLix meeting. As AUD and NEPAD, we could not attend physically, but today we have the opportunity to make sure that we set the scene, aligning what is happening through AfricaLix with the AU mandate. So without further ado, we are going to give the opportunity to Sesti, Dr. Haim, to say something before we move on to what Dr. Glenda is going to disclose as a emerging issue when it comes to measure innovation. So I'm handing over to Dr. Haim. And once again, thank you for joining us and being very supportive to the STI measurement agenda on the continent. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Seke. So my name is Idam Peterson. I work at with Glenda at the CESTI, the Center for Science, Technology and Innovation Indicators. I'll just talk a little bit about, or very briefly about CESTI and our work, which Rebecca referred to is the Africa Leaks thematic chair or thematic working group, research group on Africa-focused innovation measurement. So CESTI is responsible for running the national R&D and business innovation surveys in South Africa on behalf of the Department of Science and Innovation. And we do so using the well-established international guidelines and standards set through the Bruscati and OSDO manuals. And recently we developed a new theme of work which focuses on experimenting with better ways to contextualize our surveys. And this includes considering what we measure. So we've extended our surveys to include measurements of innovation in agricultural and informal businesses. We also look at how we measure business innovation survey through adapting our methodologies and instruments. And we are experimenting with developing new indicators to better inform policy. And this is the focus of this webinar, which Glenda and Amy will talk about more. And under this theme of work, at CESTI, we are leading this Africa Leaks thematic research group on Africa-focused innovation measurement, and it's in collaboration with NASATEM in Nigeria. And the main aim of this thematic group is to contribute to building a knowledge base and promote collaboration and networking for advancing theoretical and empirical research on innovation measurement in Africa. A key focus is stimulating discussion on furthering a research agenda for innovation measurement in Africa, and bringing together scholars, policymakers, and practitioners to reflect on the theoretical and conceptual underpinnings of innovation measurement, specifically in considering what is appropriate for African countries. So we have a set of key activities and outputs, including papers on STI measurement in Africa, as well as a set of engagements, and this Africa Leaks webinar is one of them. So that's just a summary of the thematic chair. And I look forward to the discussion today. So I'll hand back to Seke to introduce Glenda and Amy as the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Haim. Golden cake of STI measurement is giving space to everyone. Before we start focusing on digitalization, since we are already having some meetings in various African Union member states on how to move away from using manual way of analyzing data, we just need to inform you that through the Science Granting Council initiative, in forthcoming phase, we are going to focus on that. But as I was saying that our golden cake of STI measurement is so huge for us really to enjoy, today we are not going to focus on digitalization. We need to focus on emerging issue when it comes to innovation measurement. And with that, we have our guest of honor of the day, Dr. Glenda, who has been leading a very powerful institution. We saw the maturity of South Africa in measuring R&D and innovation, and not only using the Frascati and Oslo manual as far as the guidelines are concerned, but they have new layers when it comes to STI measurement, because STI is not only R&D and innovation. And today we need to explore emerging issue when it comes to innovation. So without further ado, we need to invite Dr. Glenda really to take us through this process where we need to learn further and to see how we can implement and make sure that member states, where they are, manage also to pilot what South Africa is already handling, including Nigeria. Dr. Glenda, you have the floor.
Hello, everyone. I am sitting out of my office, so I might have connectivity problems, but please tell me if I do. I'm going to switch off my camera and share my screen. And is that, can you see my screen on presentation mode?
100%, Dr. Glenda,
Okay.
We can see.
Thank you, everyone, for being here today. And we really look forward to an exciting engagement in this. As Dr. Seke says, it's a very big space. And one of the things we are realizing is that we lack a sufficiently strong research base across Africa to be able to inform our indicator design work. And that is one of the goals that we would like to try and achieve through this thematic group, is to strengthen that base. So the broad area of our work can be classed as developing new innovation indicators to inform new policy mixes in African countries. And I'm going to, what we're going to talk about is the big picture. I'm first going to start with the big picture. What we all know that we're saying we want new indicators in Africa. We've had various attempts to design indicators that are better suited to the structures of our economy and our development challenges. But what we are doing, as Ilham has said in SESTI, is we're experimenting on what kinds of STI indicators we should be working on in South Africa, and then by extension, engaging with our partners in NASATEM and other countries to talk about what we should be measuring in Africa. And the focus of today, how we're focusing in and narrowing in for today, is to look at how we can make indicators of innovation through building on innovation surveys to be of greater policy value. And what we will do is we're starting by classifying modes of innovation capabilities at firm level, and we'll speak more to that. So we've experimented with one approach on the South African data, and Amy Khan, who's been working on the data, will take you through how to categorize firms' innovation capabilities. And then it'll come back to me to try to tease out what are the kinds of policy insights we can gain from this kind of evidence, from these indicators. So to start off with the big picture, increasingly there's recognition that we need to have a challenge-led STI policy mix that's appropriate in African contexts. And as I say, that leads us to the question of what new and different kinds of indicators should we be working on? Because in the past, if you look at this one, this slide looks very busy and very confusing. But if you look at the gray areas, in the past, we have focused on studying innovation and economic growth. But now there's a recognition that STI should be addressing our multiple development challenges. And that leads us to focus more on performance, competencies, capabilities, and ecosystems. And which means we need new kinds of models and approaches. And we're looking at how STI is oriented to promote public health, green transitions, innovation and technology in firms, and our general capacities for science. So that means we have to then, whereas traditionally we've measured through bibliometrics, patterns, maybe tech transfer surveys, or using econometric methods, we now need to measure new dimensions. So for example, we need to have a stronger understanding of our macro level socio-political constraints. Or we need to understand the specific nature of networks and knowledge flows in our contexts. So today I've put in bold that we need to understand innovation capabilities in our contexts far more, and I'll say a little bit more about that later. And so to do this, we need new methodologies. So traditionally, we've been using R&D surveys, innovation surveys, and we've been using them for global benchmarking. And we've invested a lot of money in these surveys. And as Mr. Seki says, we're now trying to digitalize these surveys to create stronger data sets. So what we're arguing is that on our agenda, we should be trying to define surveys that are using the Frascati and Oslo at their core, but helps us to understand innovation in health or the green economy or in food security and so on. We should also be doing more research using multiple comparative case studies or experiments so that we can understand our African context much more firmly and use that as the basis for designing indicators. And then we come to talk about the kinds of new matrices we need. And we might want to look at indicator frameworks. We might want to look at topologies of sectoral or spatial ecosystems. But what we're focusing today on is how we can profile modes of innovation in our contexts to inform the way we orient policy. So we have been designing a general process. I won't go through this too long. I will go through it very quickly. But if you start in the top left-hand corner, you would be starting with your country's innovation agenda, which are aligned with the SDGs and the STISA strategy for Africa. And that means you would have a specific innovation policy mix to address the kinds of innovation problems you're experiencing in your context. Now, to design new indicators, what we've then done as step 2 is to select a focal development priority or innovation problem. And today we're focusing on the issue of firm technological upgrading. And then step 3 is that we try to conceptualize components of the system or the value chain and identify main innovation actors. And that allows us then to move to analyze the specific policy intents related to that dimension in our country. Step 5, look for the available data sets, because we can say we want to design an indicator system to measure XYZ, but if we don't have the data, then it remains an aspiration and we can't create useful evidence for policy. And then step 6 is informed by all of those processes, is to design innovation indicators oriented to a specific policy intent. And then because this is a pragmatic model of experimentation, it continues around. So today, as I said, we're going to focus in on the challenge that we have for firm technological upgrading and capability building at firm level, which means we need to understand the specific modes of innovation that are found in our context. And I'm going to talk next about why we need to do that. But essentially, it's because we want to have contextually relevant indicators, interventions. So we do indicators as a guide for evidence for policy making, for STI policy making. But a lot of the STI models that we've adopted and the frameworks that and the interventions we've adopted in our countries are based on the experience of high-income countries. Hence, we're stressing that we need to understand the kinds of innovation that are actually taking place on the ground in our contexts. And that's why at CESTI, one of the things we've done is try to measure innovation in agricultural enterprises and in informal enterprises, which are so important to our economies, to create new kinds of data sets. But today we're talking about using the innovation data sets that we're already having. And we start off with a question that came from Anthony Arundel, who was with us a few years ago. And the challenge he put is, how can we use business innovation survey data to be of greater value to the policymaker? And he has proposed that one needs to analyze modes of innovation at firm level, and that will be more useful to the policymaker. So let me talk about why. So essentially, we're talking about moving from the kinds of binary indicators that we have to more multidimensional indicators. So typically, if you want to describe innovation, or if you want to analyze your innovation survey data, you're going to look at the distinction between 70% are doing product innovation, 30% are doing process, 40% are non-technological innovations, and 60% are technological interventions. Or we might distinguish whether we've got more radical or more incremental innovations in our context. And more recently, we have a very useful distinction between science, technology, and innovation-driven modes, and doing, using, and interacting-driven modes of innovation. Now, when we use these kinds of binary indicators, we can benchmark our country's progress over time at a very, very high level. And we can also compare how we're doing to another country. But if you're the policymaker and you've chosen a particular policy mix that suits you, that you think is appropriate to your context and the kinds of innovation problems you have in your context, if you know that 30% of firms do product innovation and 70% do process, that doesn't really help to give you useful evidence as to where you should intervene, how you should intervene, what kinds of instruments you should be using, and so on. And especially because we know, those of us who are studying innovation, that in the real world, there's not a neat binary. So a firm is as much likely to be doing process innovations to accompany a product innovation, or non-technological innovations as part of a technological innovation. And even when we have science, technology, and innovation-driven modes, we are also implementing them through a firm doing, using, and interacting modes. So there's a growing call for more multidimensional indicators, more fine-grained, that allow more fine-grained distinctions, that can be defined in ways that are contextually specific and that allow us to have more fine-grained identifications and mapping of the profiles of innovation in the firms in our country. And if we do it this way, we would argue, and we're hoping to show, that this allows us to have more useful and more valuable evidence for policy learning. So we could ask questions about, does the instruments we've chosen fit with the patterns that we're finding on the ground? Where, if we're looking at product innovation in a country and we're saying only 5% of firms are doing product innovation, then in effect, we're measuring absence. We're saying what we can't do. So, and we're assuming that the norm is we should be doing more product innovations. But with having multidimensional indicators and mapping profiles, we can identify where are there emergent trends, where are there gaps, where are there spaces for leveraging, and this enables us to inform more targeted policy interventions, and these indicators can also be used to track change over time. And now, right. So how do we go about it? And when we started to look, there's quite an extensive literature. And if you're interested, we can share bibliographic details with you afterwards. But there's quite an extensive literature on defining modes of innovation in high-income countries, in the global south, in Latin America, and so on. And the principles to develop these taxonomies can be done in one of three ways. You can do a cutoff approach. You can use a single data-driven variable like product or process, which leads to a binary indicator. You can do data-driven taxonomies where you select key dimensions that might be meaningful in your context, and then you do factor analysis, principal component analysis, etc., to identify groups that are evident in the data and allow the data to kind of speak for itself. And or you can do top-down mixed classification. So you select variables and you assign firms to a set of predefined groups based on this combination of factors. And what we are sharing today is our experimentation with this third method, where we drew on the literature to design a top-down mixed classification system and ran it on our business innovation data. So I am now going to hand over to Amy to talk about how do we actually do this? How do we identify modes of innovation using these Oslo BIS data sets? How do we define this set of top-down output modes of innovation? Over to you, Amy, and you can just tell me when to change slides.
Okay, thanks, Glenda, and good afternoon or good morning, everyone. So I'm going to be explaining how we defined modes of innovation.
Take time.
Sorry?
I think somebody needed to mute.
Okay. So as Glenda mentioned, we for this classification of modes, we drew largely on the work of Arundel and O'Brien, 2009, and we can share this this work with you so that you can see how what we did compares to their method. And we applied their classification of modes to the Business Innovation Survey, which we run at CESTI. And we run it on data from the last survey, which was covered the reference period 2014 to 16. And I did share the questionnaire on the chat. It's just one chat box up, because a lot of what I'm going to say, the very technical parts of what I'm going to say, will only really make sense if you refer to the questionnaire. So firstly, what we did was we decided on 5 modes of innovation. And what we wanted to do was to assign all our product innovation firms to one of these 5 groups. Okay, so they're mutually exclusive groups. And we're working with product innovators only, because some of the information is not collected for process innovators, such as the novelty of the innovations. So once we'd assigned the firms to the different groups, we get the distribution, as you can see on the slide. So most of our firms, or just over a third of the firms, fall under the category of international modifiers. Then there's also a large portion that fall under adopters, so they adopt innovations, and then smaller percentages fall in the other 3 groups, so domestic modifiers, new to market international innovators, and new to market domestic innovators. So at the moment, it's a bit unclear what these 5 groups actually mean. So that's what I'm going to explain here. So we've got our output modes in the left-hand column. So that's those 5 groups that we just saw. And we create or we allocate firms to these groups based on 3 dimensions. So the first dimension is the market reach of the firm. So whether they operate on international markets,
or just domestic markets. And this refers to the firm as a whole, not necessarily their product innovations. And then the second dimension is the novelty of the product innovations. So whether they are new to the world, or new to domestic markets only, or only new to the firm. And then thirdly, the third dimension is who was responsible for the product innovations. So were they developed in-house within the firm, or were they primarily developed outside of the firm, and therefore adopted by the firm? Okay, the next slide. So I'm now going to go into a lot of very much technical detail. So this is what I said, it would be worth referring to the questionnaire to make sense of this. But basically, I'm just going to explain how we created or assigned firms to these 5 different groups, and how we assign them to the 3 different dimensions, and therefore the 5 different groups. So the first dimension, which is market reach, is done using a question that is asked to all firms on which geographic markets they sold their goods or services during the survey period 2014 to 16. And then it gives a list of international geographic regions, and then the South Africa itself. So basically, if they operated at the international level, then they must have said that they operate in one of these regions. So the rest of Africa, Europe, United States, Asia, or other countries. So other countries outside of South Africa. So if they said yes to at least one of those, then they were categorized as international firms. If they said no to all of these categories, then they were domestic operators only. Okay, so that's the next slide. So the next question we used to categorize firms into the third dimension, which is novelty of their product innovations. So we used question 2.4, which is, were any of your product innovations during the 3 years either new to international markets, new to domestic markets, or new to the firm? And for this question, it does allow multiple responses, because the question is could be referring to multiple innovations. So we used a hierarchical approach to allocate firms to these different groups. So if they said that that their innovations were new to the world, then they were classified as new to international markets. If they said no to new to the world, but yes to a first in South Africa, or the industry or their market, then they were classified as new to domestic markets. And if they said no to all of those questions and yes to only new to your firm, then they were classified as new to firm. Okay, and then the third dimension was who was responsible for the innovations. So by whom were these product innovations developed? And they were either in-house developers or adopters. So if they answered that the product innovations were mainly developed by the enterprise, or the enterprise together with other enterprises or institutions, or by adapting or modifying goods or services originally developed by other institutions, then they were in-house developers. But if the innovations were developed externally, so other enterprises in their enterprise group, or mainly other enterprises or institutions, then they were classified as adopters. So once they were classified into all these different groups, we were then able to classify them into an output mode. So yeah, if we go back to this slide, then we see that all firms that were classified as international and new to the world innovations, and they developed their innovations in-house, were then assigned to the new to market international innovators mode. And similarly with the other 4 modes. So there's sort of this 2-step process to first assigning them to a group within the dimensions and then to a specific mode, so that all firms are assigned to one of those modes. And then just to say that some firms, yeah, so I did mention before, we can only look at product innovators, but hopefully in the future we can do the same for process innovators, because we've updated the questionnaire to ask for novelty of process innovations as well. And then also to say that there's always going to be some firms that we can't categorize, because if one of those questions is has not been answered, or is a don't know response, or is inconsistent, then the firm can't be categorized. So we need to know the answers to all of those questions in order to categorize them. So yeah, I mean, I'm happy to answer any questions after this, but have a look at the questionnaire in the chat, and hopefully it will make sense. Thanks.
Thanks, Amy. So the important point to take forward is that we're using business innovation data sets that we're already gathering, and we're analyzing them in new ways that we're arguing by understanding the spread of innovation capabilities in a country. We've got better evidence to inform a policy mix. I'm having a problem changing here. Give me a minute. So to go back to the overall diagram that Amy showed you, I just want to move this. There we go. So we've identified modes of innovation, and we're seeing that in South Africa, using this classification system, we are strongest on international modifiers and adopters, but we've got some significant domestic modifiers, and we've got a small group of new to market international innovators, but very small new to market domestic innovators. So this already gives us quite a bit of insight in evidence for policy making. So what does it tell us? Because typically, a lot of our instruments, and this has been the case in South Africa for quite some time until recently, most of the instruments are oriented to promote innovation for new to market international innovators or new to market domestic innovators, maybe slightly for modifiers, but they're not oriented to adopters, and they're not oriented as much to domestic modifiers. So that already tells us that we need our policy mix, our policy instruments should have a wider spread to all firms with all these modes of innovation capabilities. But the method allows us to go beyond that, because we can profile the firms. So who are the new to market international innovators, and who are the international modifiers? What do they look like? Again, using our innovation data. So the first one we tried to do was look at sectoral distributions. Now, this didn't work as well for us because we didn't have sufficient data to be able to break down into SIC codes. So we had to break down as manufacturing and services. But nonetheless, we can identify some spaces for targeted interventions through mapping the differences between sectors. So, for example, we see that the services, which is the orange, has got almost double the proportion of domestic modifiers than manufacturing. And the international modifiers are slightly more likely to be in manufacturing. And the new to market domestic innovators are quite significantly more in the manufacturing sector. So this can give us insights into working with sectors in different ways and with groups of firms with different innovation capabilities. And then we profiled, we had asked a question in our survey about the adoption of advanced technologies such as AI, digitalization, etc. And we counted the number of new technologies that each of these 5 groups with different modes of innovation capabilities reported. So you'll see that the new to market innovators were reporting that they were adopting 4 to 6 new technologies, but the adopters, 3/4, none of them had adopted advanced technologies. So again, this gives you quite important information where there's quite a key emergent trend in the international and domestic modifiers and new to market domestic innovators that are adopting 1 to 3. So one might want to focus policy interventions to grow that further, but one might need different kinds of interventions to promote the adoption of technologies in the adopter group. Second example, we always analyze barriers to innovation. And what we've done here is we've grouped the barriers to innovation into cost factors, knowledge factors, market factors, and institutional factors. And then we've looked at how each of the groups report the importance of these barriers. So for the adopters, the most important is cost factors. But for the new to market international innovators, cost factors and market factors are the most important. And we see that not many of the groups see institutional factors like the legislative framework and regulatory frameworks and so on as important, but the international modifiers, that is a very important barrier to their innovation. So again, this allows us, the policymaker, to use the BIS data in more useful ways by having a more nuanced analysis and interpretation of what firms are actually doing and where there is emergent strengths, where there are gaps, where there's space for interventions and space to leverage trends that are already happening. Right, next one. So taking this all together, and I'm not going to go into this very busy table in too many ways, for too long, in too much detail. But what we've done is if you look at the second column from the left, we've just specified the mode of innovation capabilities. And then we have summarized how each sees the technology intensity, their sectoral spread. I didn't show you, but we've also analyzed firm size class and the barriers that they see as important. And when we do it like that, we see that there could be 3 policy priorities in South Africa. First, we need to broaden the capabilities of more firms to access and absorb new technologies. And that applies very much to the adopters and of course to those who haven't innovated at all. Then we can build stronger capabilities for technology modification and upgrading, whether it's to operate on global or domestic markets, and that applies to the modifiers. And then finally, we can strengthen the dynamic innovation capabilities of groups of firms that can operate on global or domestic markets. So, as I said before, typically in South Africa, our instruments were being oriented to the group of strengthening dynamic innovation capabilities and focusing on promoting commercialization and technology transfer. And we find that there's a bit of a mismatch because almost a third of the firms who are innovating are adopting technologies developed elsewhere with little modifications and little novelty. So we need to find ways to support their innovation, which is equally important for technological upgrading across the country. So in summary, we've really shown you our experimentation towards this bigger task of designing contextually grounded STI policy evidence. And the big policy message that we drew out is the importance of building innovation and technological capabilities across the full range of firms, and particularly those who have no or minimal innovation capabilities. And the same might apply in different African countries, because if we use the criteria of new to international markets and innovating, we might find very little activity. But if we use more fine-grained categories, we can find very important areas and spots of innovation capabilities that we can build on. So we're arguing that such multidimensional indicators can be used as evidence to inform the selection of context-appropriate STI policy interventions and to track change over time towards our country or any country's desired policy goals. And it's very important that we shift from the binary indicators and the binary focus of the past, which has been largely based on the policy models of high-income countries. Now, we started this work in South Africa as there were attempts. It took 2 to 3 years to review the existing white paper on science, technology, and innovation, and to finalize and approve a new white paper. And so by the time the new white paper has been finalized, this kind of work that we're doing is aligned with the new white paper, which is looking for evidence and new kinds of indicators to support a new STI policy intent. And I'm quoting directly from this policy instrument, where the goal is actually to have integrated sets of alignment on a continuum that mandates support to all types of research, development, and innovation through elaborating sector-specific strategies that could be aligned with line departments, whether it's mining or agriculture or trade and industry and so on. Because the one point I forgot to say is that when we looking at the barriers also point to the need for greater alignment between innovation policy and industrial policy, because states can't necessarily intervene to improve market conditions directly. They can shape market conditions. But if the Department of Science and Innovation is working separately or in a way that's not aligned with the kinds of interventions that are happening in industrial policy space, then we can have unintended consequences and misalignments. So the data also helps us to reinforce the need for alignment of policy in a more nuanced way. And then finally, what are our next steps? Amy already hinted at it. So we used this top-down classification model for this project, but what we are starting to work on is doing more data-driven taxonomies. We currently have a couple of surveys that are coming out the field, and we'll have new data sets. And we're waiting till those data sets are ready in the next few months to be able to analyze and design what are the modes that we're seeing from the ground up in our own context. And then we want to extend this analysis. We have looked at our business innovation data, but we want to look at our agricultural innovation capabilities and our innovation capabilities in informal enterprises. And that gives us a fuller picture of innovation activity in the country and the different kinds of innovation that we need to be promoting. We're also hoping to experiment with you, that you could try similar approaches in your countries. And overall, we're aiming to contribute to building up an African indicator and evidence base that's grounded in our context and our realities, so that we can have much more meaningful evidence for STI policy towards our great challenges and development goals. And that is our story. And I will stop sharing and I will hand back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Glenda, for taking us through something very useful, important in alignment with our environment as Africa. We cannot always be following what is happening in the developed world, because we also observe, even when it's come to the cutoff, the Oslo manual is telling us that we should only capture firms where we have at least 10 employees upward. And we believe in the African context, things are not the same. And we really appreciate how South Africa, you start capturing information when it's come to innovation based on the turnover. Egypt did the same. So really, we are so proud seeing the way we are taking this matter of measurement at the Africa Leaks platform, where we believe that some theoretical and empirical assignment and exercise to shake a bit our brain is very important for us to understand the issue of innovation, especially in the business sector. So we are going to hand over to Annelien before we open the floor. As you know, we are also part of the SADC group on STI indicators, and the SADC region is one of the grouping that we have under the African Union, where STI measurement is really booming and then consistent across the countries. So Annelien, you have the floor before we open the floor also to the participant, since we only have 37 minutes. Thank you very much, Annelien.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Seke, and afternoon to everybody. Thank you, Mr. Seke from Audi NEPAD as our moderator. I'd like to thank Africa Leaks, Professor Hanley, who opened up the webinar. Thank you for this exciting webinar and discussion. But also thanks to our researchers from CESTI and giving some policy direction in this area of innovation indicators, Dr. Glenda and the colleagues who have just presented the paper. So my role, I'll just pick up on some key issues that are coming out of the presentation, as highlighted by Dr. Glenda. As Seke introduced me, I'm Annelien Morgan from the SADC Secretariat, based in Gaborone, Botswana, responsible for science, technology, and innovation. And we work very closely with Audi NEPAD under the SD program, as most of our member states participate in SD. I'd also like to acknowledge the participation of our member states who are also connected here today, because we extended the invitation of this webinar to the SADC member states, so a number of them have connected. So thank you very much, member states, for connecting. I will be switching off my video in case the connectivity is not that good. So I've just had to switch it on just to introduce myself. So I'll turn off my video and then just go quickly just to highlight some of the pointers from the presentation that Dr. Glenda just delivered. So I think I'm happy that Dr. Glenda, that you ended off and colleagues who presented, Shyam, on the fact that you know, this is also looked in the context of improving the policy nexus between innovation policy, or science, technology, and innovation, and industrial policy and trade policy, because that's actually what's going to be my starting point at the beginning, to highlight the weak linkages within that policy process. But also we can see that there is, and I think you've acknowledged that there's limited understanding of strengthening our technological capabilities at the level of firm. For them to innovate across different sectors. And I think there's still a lot of research lacking in that area. And I think as this work has begun, we should build on this research to inform policy decisions and policy recommendations. But I think you also acknowledge that you're saying that South Africa's STI policy mix over the years has been more on the supply side to grow innovation or scientific capabilities at an institutional level, but also research and development level, but and also knowledge production. And we've seen now recently through the leadership of the Department of Science and Innovation, the policy shift at the level of South Africa. We know historically you had a white paper, which is now recently being revised, the new white paper for science, technology and innovation, which is 2019 adopted. But you also had the National Research and Development Strategy, which was also followed by the 10-year innovation plan. And now we have the Science and Technology Innovation Decadal Plan, which has shifted in terms of language. If you look at the Decadal Plan, the policy language is different. If you look at the 10-year innovation plan and the National Research and Development Strategy, and that policy language is mainly centered around transformative, inclusive, innovation and technological capabilities. I think the realization that if you look at the triple challenges that South Africa faces, which is unemployment, inequality, and poverty. And I think there's an urgency from a state level. There's an urgency at state level that all government sectors need to address the triple challenge of South Africa through the different interventions that they need to implement. So from a science, technology, and innovation position, I think that policy language has now included transformative and inclusive an inclusive approach. And I think, as you're rightfully saying, you looked at the types of innovation problems when looking at the different modes, as you highlighted in your presentation. We also see that. And we know from recent or from quotes that are always mentioned, and I quote to say, you can't improve what you don't measure. And we normally hear this within our discourse, within our policy discourse, that says you can't improve what you don't measure. So very important that we improve our measurement capabilities, but also contextualizing them, as you rightfully said. Yes, we've got the Oslo manual and the Frascati manual, which are international benchmarks, but mainly designed around the OECD countries, as per your last statement at the end, where you said that these measurement instruments are mainly designed for high-income countries. But if you look at the structure of Africa, we've got different categories of developmental states. You've got the low-income countries. A lot of sub-Saharan African countries are falling within what we call LDCs, which are low-income countries. And you've got few who are within the middle-income categories. So definitely, I think this is coming at the right time, that we need to develop this knowledge around contextualizing our own measurement instruments. And that's why we have policy failure. And we have policy failure because we take stuff designed for developed countries or for developed contexts, and we try to adapt it at a developing context. And hence you see a lot of policy failures at the national level, but also I would say at the regional and continental level, especially if you look at different policies like industrial policy, trade policy, and science and technology policies at the national level. We've seen that a lot of the countries, specifically I can speak confidently within the context of SADC, there's a number of countries that have just gone through what we call science and technology policy reviews at the national level. And if you look at the reviews are coming less than 5 years or 6 years of the previous policies that were adopted, and which implementation has not really being measured. You know, the extent of implementation has not yet been measured, because we try to play catch up all the time. And you see that what are these reviews informed by? They're informed by the new policy discourse around 4IR, knowledge economies, digital transformation. So we try to play catch up without necessarily understanding the policies that we've adopted and where we've implemented what has worked, what hasn't worked, and where we have failed. So we basically kind of repeat the cycle again by having these reviews and having these new policies with all these new policy focus areas. So I think that's also one area that we need to look at within the context of Africa. But I think also the table that you in the slide that you displayed, where you have the country level, and you've got the SDGs, you've got STISA. I would add also the national development plans, because national development plans play a critical role of where the budgets go to, because a lot of all countries have NDPs. South Africa has an NDP 2030. A lot of the countries, in fact, all of the countries in Africa have NDPs, and NDPs are the drivers of where priorities will be funded, but they're also politically motivated, because a lot of the NDPs also speak to some of the whichever political parties in power at the time of government that's running the state, and what priorities are focused on. And that's where the funding from your national treasuries and finances will also be focused at. So NDPs, I would add to that category, which you put at country level. At step 3, I would also add, yes, you've mentioned it at the end, and I'm happy that you mentioned it at the end, industrial policy and trade policy, but I would actually put it in the step 3, you know, just to imply, to say, you talk about regional value chains, you talk about global value chains, but then link this to industrial policy and trade policy. But I would also go further to the regulatory frameworks, because obviously always we look at issues of regulations where business complain about the red tape. We saw at the last year's State of the Nation address, where the president of South Africa appointed an advisor that will cut the red tape. How is that linked, for example, to creating a more enabling environment for firms to innovate? Like you're saying, you know, we need to broaden the base of firms that innovate, because most of them are not innovating. They are modifiers, modifying of innovations. So I think issues of regulations, but also looking at procurement frameworks, because we often don't consider procurement frameworks in the context of innovation and technology, not only in the private sector, but also in the public sector, because how do we also ensure that there are appropriate procurement frameworks to support innovation and technological developments within the level of the state, but also just to highlight some of the other areas. So I've written quite a number of pointers, but I'm going to try and jump some because of time. I just want to go straight now towards the end. So you make the argument of broadening the base of firms to be more product developers, but the question is how and who, you know, and I think that's maybe something we can give back to yourselves to say, how will this be done? You know, did you think about any possible recommendations about whose responsibility is it? Is it the state's responsibility? Is it private sector responsibility solely, or is it through public-private partnerships? If you look, for example, case studies such as the electric vehicle, the dual electric vehicle that South Africa, where government played a role through a public-private partnership in the design of the dual electric vehicle. We saw after 10 years of investment that government invested some billions of monies into the dual. Halfway they dropped it, you know, after investing, because they said it's not viable. And that was actually the technology was homegrown. It was locally developed for electric vehicle. And then what happened? The technology has now been taken up elsewhere overseas. Same with the pebble bed modular reactor in terms of nuclear energy. Government invested a lot in the pebble bed modular reactor, and those scientists and engineers who worked on the pebble bed, they've all been taken up abroad, and they're using the very same technology that was developed in South Africa, paid for by the South African taxpayers, and now that technology is being used elsewhere. To develop pebble bed reactors elsewhere in the world. So again, what does one say? That is weak policy, weak public policy to support innovation activities in the country. So I think also it would also be good to look at that some of those historical case studies in terms of technology, big technology demonstration projects such as the dual electric vehicle, but also the pebble bed modular reactor. So I think in summary, we also need to contextualize these national capabilities within a regional and continental context, because South Africa or any other country, it could be Botswana, Lesotho, Malawi, etc., don't operate in isolation. They operate within regional, continental, but also global environments. So, for example, how do we also link this to the continental free trade area, but also trade policy at the regional level, at the continental level, but also at the regional level. Mr. Moderator, I think I will stop there in terms of some of my comments and inputs that I've provided to the presentation, but very good presentation, and I think quite rich data and information that definitely indeed needs to be taken forward and developed further for informing policy. And I think also to acknowledge the role that Audi NEPA is playing, especially through the ASTI program, in capacitating member states. Because the other thing is we shouldn't take for granted the issue of capacities. A lot of the countries just don't have the capacity, in-house capacity to actually do these measurements. You know, South Africa is fortunate because they've got CESTI as an institution, but in some countries you've got one person from the ministry who's actually tasked to do this, and hence we don't have consistency in the data. Because they would do the surveys 1 year, skip 3 years, and do the surveys again. So I think issues of capacity also need to be taken into consideration, but also infrastructures, institutional infrastructures also need to be taken into consideration. A lot of the countries, yes, have NSOs, which is National Statistics Offices, but a lot of those NSOs are also weak. They also need capacity development in areas of statistics and data collection. And now we're also talking big data, which has come to the fore, and how do we integrate issues of big data? And I'm happy to see that in the analysis, you also looked at what emerging technologies the firms are adopting and digital technologies they're adopting in terms of those new innovations. But thank you very much to the team for a very exciting and insightful presentation, but also piece of work that has been put together. I thank you, Mr. Moderator. Thank you.
Thank you indeed, Annelien. What I would like to say before we open the floor is first to inform the audience that we are in a very scarce field. Measuring STI is not easy. And STI doesn't mean R&D and innovation only, because the father or the grandfather of all indicators is R&D. And then with the Frascati manual now 50 years old. The second thing is that on the continent, we are facing some challenges. We have to make sure that our firm remain resilient or perish because of the African free trade continental area, in addition of the very aggressive global competition existing. And is why one of the fact that justifying why some of the firms are just adopter, because they can do nothing internally, they just prefer to buy and sell. And we call them in French, compagnie commerciale. So those who are modifier, at least we understand it's possible to innovate through R&D activities, okay, intramural or extramural, but it's also possible to innovate in acquiring equipment or other products. So those are the aspects that we should never forget. And the issue also of collecting data, as Annelien said, at the SADC level, it has been taken as decision that in the SADC certificate yearbook, STI indicator should be compulsory. And that was the missing link. And to conclude before I open the floor, we went to China with the 19 African Union member states in 2010. And the lesson we learned there is that the response rate is 100% and is compulsory to respond. So in our context, countries or firms are not keen to disclose information. And we're even thinking to do triangulation where we cannot get financial information. So those are the challenges we are going through. And beyond that, we see the SADC region, the EAC region, the ECOWAS region with Dr. Roland really supporting the process, even ECAS region. So Annelien is in Kilimanjaro, Dr. Glenda is in Cape Town, Prof. Rebecca is in Johannesburg. I'm in Rwanda, Kigali, training countries on how to improve data collection. So we need to give you the opportunity now to ask questions because we are in this field and we need to work together. The floor is yours. We need hands. And the first one, let us see. We are waiting for your hand. Any question? Okay, as far as a business innovation is concerned, we just need to bring to your attention while waiting for any additional question before I hand over to the Africa League Secretariat that with regard to the latest Oslo manual, we are not preaching to the converted. We realize that we can not only carry on with the business innovation survey. So it's time now to make sure that we also track what is happening in the government sector and higher education sector. So COVID did demonstrate that it's possible to graduate through virtually. And also when we went to Zimbabwe, we discovered that Education Point 5 is making some of the university trying to implement a process where agro-industrial park is becoming compulsory. And some of the students who are having startup are also within some of those incubators to make sure that from the university, they can be able to create jobs. So these are, we are moving now with innovation, not only focusing on firms, but going beyond the business sector. So we
There's a
have,
hand from Seychelles.
yes, Seychelles. Yes, please ask your question, Madam Jessica.
Hi, thank you very much. Thank you everyone for this great presentation. I don't have a question, more a statement about this topic. I know Seychelles, we've raised this issue on many in many forums about like the fact that, especially in the innovation sector, with the Oslo manual and the criteria that they put, us being a small country, it's always very difficult for us, because by the time we do the cutoff, we don't have any firms for us to actually conduct the survey on. So I'm very happy that we are having this dialogue, and so that we can have ways forward for us to do, like for us to be able to measure, because it's unfair that you know, a country of 90,000, like 100,000, we are using indicators from like the higher income countries, but with so it's a bit difficult. So I'm really happy that we are having this conversation, and I hope that we can see some real changes on the continent, and how we collect and how we measure ourselves with these indicators. Thank you.
Much appreciated indeed. We are going to Lesotho, Madame Reboka. Hello, Lesotho, you have the floor. And we thank Jessica, because the case of Seychelles is really serious. And I think we have to consider the cutoff, the turnover than using the cutoff approach. Lesotho? Thank you. Lesotho, you have the floor. We cannot hear you, Lesotho. I think Lesotho is a problem. Okay, let us move to Namibia. Mr. Kaonina. Lesotho, just fix your mic, then you come back to us. Namibia, you have the floor.
Yes, I hope you can hear me.
100% we can hear you, sir.
Yes, so I just missed the presentation, but I wanted to support what my colleague from Seychelles just said. The issue that we have, for example, in Namibia, we understand that the Oslo manuals and the Frascati manuals we need to use them for comparison purposes. You know, we need to compare with other countries. So it's kind of an international standard instruments that we need to use. But we have a problem of developing indicators that are more relevant to our circumstances, that can inform our policies based on our circumstances. And I think that's a challenge that many of us have. So the issue is not only of focusing on, you know, R&D and innovation indicators. There are other indicators that we need to look at that are more relevant. For example, the contribution of R&D to the wider communities. How does it affect people, for example, in the far rural areas, in terms of, let's say, knowledge that reaches to them, and their participation in this SDI activities. So those are the type of indicators that we need to develop to inform our policies. But the challenge is that, well, how do we start with those developing those indicators? Which type of other indicators do we need to consider? And I think that's the biggest challenge that we have.
Thank you, Namibia, for the comment again. After Seychelles, Lesotho, I don't know, maybe Lesotho is having problem. And for your information, when
Hello?
they ask, hello, Lesotho, yes, thank you.
Yes, Seke, thank you very much. And everyone, thank you. Thank you for the presenter for presenting a wonderful topic on this STI indicators. Yes, my concern is on the non-technological innovation indicators, because I've seen that the service sector is the one that is contributing a lot on GDP. So I think we are missing the indicators on market innovation and organizational innovation, because most of the service innovators are developing marketing and organizational innovation. And maybe it is important that we should include that in our measurements. And another thing is we presented another indicator in December while we were in Cape Town, when we were measuring the collaboration intensity. When firms are collaborating with suppliers and the clients, then we are able to measure that intensity between the firms and the suppliers and the other institutions and players in the innovation system. So I think if we can take that into consideration also, it will help us to improve the indicators in our region. And maybe another thing that I should not forget is the issue of measuring, no, the issue of financing innovation, because like Ms. Annalyn has just stated that there was a problem with the issue of the government financing one of the projects in South Africa, where they have abandoned that project. So I guess if we can come up with a blended financing model, of which the government will be the one driving that model, but also inviting other stakeholders into joining into putting the resource into that fund. I think that can help, because the government will have to convince the other actors to put the funds into that funding. So I think that will help. Thank you.
Much appreciated. We are closing with Nigeria, Mr. David, and thank you, Mr. Boka from Lesotho, Nigeria. Hello, Dr. Deyeye, you have the floor. Please unmute your mic. While we are waiting for Dr. Deyeye, we just need to make sure that while we are collecting data in various countries, we need to consider the composition of GDP. Not all the countries are having propensity in services. Hello, Mr. David. Dr. David, you have the floor.
Hello, can I go ahead?
Please go ahead, Dr. David.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm actually driving, so it's a bit difficult connecting. Thank you, Dr. Glenda. Thank you, Hilam. Thank you, everyone in CESTI, for that beautiful work you are doing. This comes to us in Nigeria as a very timely presentation, because we are currently looking at the reports of the last innovation survey we did, and then we're having a writing workshop next week in Ibadan to look at the report. So we really appreciate this presentation. It's very useful for us. The question I have is that, I don't know when I missed it because I've been driving and listening. Is there a way we could, is there a plan, or did you factor in the factors that drove this kind of modes, different modes that we see? I know the CIS questionnaire has limitations because it's quantitative and mostly binary. Did you do any follow-up qualitative study to look at this, maybe select some of these firms to now see the factors driving these different modes they are exhibiting? Thank you very much.
Thank you. We need to hand over to Team CESTI and starting with Dr. Glenda, but let us be so kind to Anjefu Okidu, because that's the last hand we can accept, to give enough time to CESTI before we close the meeting and hand over to the Africa List Secretariat. So Anjefu Okidu, 1:30 seconds for the question, please. Okay, in the meantime, while waiting for the mic, Dr. Glenda, you have the floor to attend to some.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you, sir. You have 30 seconds for the question. Thank you very much.
Okay, no, I'm just trying to, add an extension, kind of. I'm from Nigeria, and I know that some of the methodologies used for arriving at some of the indicators do not fit into our context. I think we need to look more inwards into Africa to adopt some methodologies that are indigenous, that can bring out more of these indicators examples that will be relevant to the context. I think that would be very important. Thank you very much, Seke.
Thank you very much. As the decision has been taken by member states when the ASTI program has been launched in Maputo, we should adopt the international guideline without reinventing the wheel. With time, we have to consider our own context, and I'm happy it's coming now. Thank you very much. We hand over to Dr. Glenda.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for the feedback and for the useful comments. I just want to invite Ilham Peterson if she wants to add, because she's also part of the team, although we did the presentation today. Ilham, is there anything you want to respond to the comments and questions?
Well, there's one thing that you wanted me to specifically say, something that we grappled with a lot. Just to say that this has been a really interesting discussion, and it's nice to see all of your comments and questions in the chat. And it looks like I think the timing really does seem right, and for us to come together and have follow-ups, more of these kinds of discussions about how the practicalities of measuring innovation in our context, but then also how do we contextualize and ensure that we develop indicators that can really speak to our needs. So something that Glenda asked me to talk about that we grappled with was about the direction of innovation. So we tend to focus a lot, and there's a policy focus a lot on R&D and promoting R&D and innovation at the frontier. So it's really focusing on trying to get firms in that direction. And something that I think is important for policy is that we need a mix, and it's also understanding that of looking at where firms at. So these kinds of indicators allow us to see the mix of capabilities within our context, and ensure that policy is able to build capabilities based on the current picture of the current level of capabilities of firms within the country, and then also to also keep in mind that it's not necessary for everybody to be innovating and innovating at the frontier. So there doesn't necessarily have to be this push. It's also about your domestic economy and how we are building capabilities, local capabilities for our local economies and growing our local economies, and making sure that policy is recognizes that, and rather than sort of just pushing the frontier and R&D and innovation in that direction. Thank you.
Thanks, Ilham. So I think I've only got one. Amy, do you want to respond on anything?
No, I'm fine, thanks. I did respond to a few of the comments in the chat, but I don't have anything else. Thanks.
Thanks. So the only general comment I want to make goes back to the very first slide that I've showed, that actually we do need to create new kinds of data, and we do need to do more case studies and more contextualized analysis within our own kinds of economies. And we need a lot more of that research. And then when it comes to designing new indicators, this is but one example, one new way of doing it. We're not saying this is how we must do it every time. So we're not even convinced ourselves whether that top-down model and the categories we've used are the right ones ultimately. But this is a step. So we've started with that, and we're seeing what are the possibilities, what kinds of evidence, what kinds of things can it tell us. And then we're going to try the bottom up, and we'll compare that. And so on and so forth. We might do top-down modes with different dimensions, for example. So there's a lot of experimentation to be done, and this is really an invitation to us in the AfricaLIX and in the ASTI networks to start experimenting along these lines.
Thank you very much, Dr. Glenda. We believe that when ministers in charge of science, technology, and innovation, as well as education training, will be having the meeting in DRC, Kinshasa, in June, this matter will be raised. And we are so grateful to Africa Leaks bringing the deep analysis of R&D and innovation measurement, and bringing the academia to the business of AU member state, where we are just presenting the status of R&D spending and innovation through the African Innovation Outlook report. So we are seeing a new layer that even donors are recognizing the role of Africa Leaks and the university academia in this. Congratulations to CESTI and to NACETEM for piloting this. And we understand being in a very scarce field, and we believe we can make it possible. We are handing over to Africa Leaks. Thank you, Dr. Ann Kingiri, being part of the ST Technical Advisory Group, Dr. Glenda yourself, and Prof. Rebecca. Very soon we'll be focusing on the digitalization of STI measurement. We are handing over to the Secretariat, and congratulations to everyone that have been supportive to this for this process to be successful. Annalyn Morgan, thank you for your support to member countries. And we need really to give this opportunity to Africa Leaks to own the process in closing this meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Seke. And I think if everybody could turn their cameras on for those that are able to, and perhaps we can just give their presenters and Seke as the chair a little round of applause. You could also use the applause sign in the reactions if you would like. But great. Thank you so much, Seke, for your chairing, very competent chairing. Glenda, Amy, and Ilham, thank you very much for your presentations. And Annalyn, for your critical response. Very, very helpful.
I just want to, sorry, Prof. Rebecca,
Yes,
I just want
please,
to send a shout out. My sister has joined, so just if she can switch on a video. I hope she's still online.
Very good.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Prof.
No problems. It's nice to have family involved as well.
Yes. Yes.
Africa Leaks is very much a family, and for those of you who don't know much about Africa Leaks, I realize I didn't give an introduction to Africa Leaks at the beginning of the seminar. So Africa Leaks is a network of innovation and development researchers across Africa. We're focused on the intersection between innovation and development and development processes, and we spend a lot of time building and developing the capabilities of young researchers working at this intersection, and many of whom go on to work in ministries and become the next generation of STI policymakers. So it's great to have these kind of discussions. We have 2 thematic research groups or chairs at the moment functioning, and we hope that we'll be able to develop further research thematic chairs areas as we move forward. I would like to encourage you all to continue following us on social media. Yvonne, our communications officer, has posted in the chat links to our YouTube channel where this presentation and this webinar video will get put up. We also have a very active Twitter handle, and also LinkedIn and Facebook pages. So please follow us. Our next event is on the 13th of April. We will be hearing from Dr. Olaposi from the African Institute for Science, Policy and Innovation at Obafemi Awolowo University in Nigeria. She will be talking about technological innovation and economic inequality. And as I say, that will be on the 13th of April at the same time as this webinar. So look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you again to our chair for today and our session speakers and our respondents. There will be a written report coming out in due course from the work that the thematic chair is undertaking in collaboration with their partners on this in Nigeria. And we look forward to being able to share that with you in due course and continuing this discussion. And we look forward to also having further discussions on this at other AfricaLIX events. A shout out for those of you who are PhD students, the PhD Academy call is open. Please submit your application if you are interested. And with that, thank you all very much. Have a good rest of the afternoon, evening, or morning, depending on where you're joining us from. Thanks again, and see you next time.